On her very first day of training, Claire Evans was called a paper soldier, someone only good for writing reports, too weak to carry a real weapon. One soldier even sneered, grabbed her wrist, and mocked. "Let's check for chalk dust, Professor." But when that wrist revealed three faintly carved numbers, 43,124, every gaze turned to dead silence. A nearby major exhaled sharply. The Shadow Brigade. I didn't think she was still alive. No one dared to breathe. Welcome to Thread Tales, where we unravel stories that grip your soul. Stay with us as we dive into Claire's journey, one that'll leave you speechless. The Red Falcon Summer Tactical Camp was a brutal stretch of dirt and dust. A valley so dry the ground split under your feet. It wasn't a camp for summer fun. It was a military simulation program meant to grind you down. Veteran. Soldiers mixed with civilian recruits, doctors, engineers. Analysts all slogging through combat scenarios that felt like war. Days started before sunrise, with runs over jagged trails. Nights ended with honor evaluations from officers who looked at you like you'd already failed. Can you feel the weight of those stares? Stick with Thread Tales to see how Claire faced them. Head-on. Claire Evans stuck out like a sore thumb. She was 27, barely 5'4", with fair, rosy skin and bright blue eyes that stayed fixed on the ground. Her uniform was standard, but a little loose. Her name tag, Evans, pinned crooked like she'd rushed it. Her boots were caked with mud, and her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful. She carried a notebook everywhere, scribbling tiny notes, and asked permission for everything, speaking, moving, touching a map. To the others, she looked like a kid who'd stumbled into the wrong place. Claire's reputation made her a target. She'd graduated top of her class at the academy, a fact that followed her like a curse. Nobody bought it. Not the soldiers with scars on their knuckles, not the civilians desperate to prove themselves, not even the instructors who'd read her file. A woman like her, quiet, soft-spoken, with no public combat record, couldn't be that good. They pegged her as a rich girl from some powerful family, someone who'd ace the tests but fold when things got real. The nickname Paper Soldier stuck fast, a jab at her grades and lack of grit. Whispers trailed her behind her back, to her face, in the mess tent, on the field. She didn't snap back, didn't flinch. She kept her head down, her pencil moving, her boots crunching through the dirt like the words didn't touch her. The first tactical drill was a mess. The team had to secure a mock perimeter under simulated enemy fire, with blanks popping and smoke grenades clouding the air. The sergeant, a guy named Harov, with a voice like a chainsaw, barked orders as soldiers scrambled to set up barriers. Claire stood off to the side, her notebook open, sketching the terrain with quick, sharp lines. Harov spotted her and stormed. Over his face read, "Evans, you're a file clerk, right? Stay on the sidelines. Don't make your team drag you out." The words hit like a punch. A soldier nearby, a tall guy named Brody, with a buzzcat and a permanent smirk, leaned toward his buddy and muttered, "Graduated top of class and thinks she's special forces." Laughter rippled through the group, low and mean. Aunt Claire didn't look up. She turned a page in her notebook, her pencil scratching softly, and studied the map like nobody had spoken. Harov shook his head and moved on, but the air around Claire felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for her to break. During a gear inspection the next day, the cruelty took a sharper edge. The team lined up in the blazing sun, their rifles and packs laid out for review. Claire's equipment was meticulous, every strap folded, every clip in place, but Kelsey, a soldier with a tight ponytail, walked by and deliberately kicked Claire's pack, sending it tumbling into the dust. "Oops, didn't see your toy bag there, Paper Soldier," she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. The others snickered as Claire knelt to gather her gear, her hands steady but her jaw tight. A civilian recruit, a wiry guy named Jensen, with a habit of sucking up to the veterans, joined in. "Look at her playing house with her little kit. Bet she's got a diary in there to cry about how tough this is." The laughter grew louder, and a few soldiers stepped closer, watching Claire like she was a sideshow. She didn't speak. She repacked her bag, her movements precise, and stood up, dusting off her uniform. Her eyes flicked to Kelsey just for a second, but she turned away. Her silence louder than any comeback. That night, the mess tent was loud with clinking trays and soldiers blowing off steam. Claire sat alone at a corner table, her food untouched. A map spread out under a flickering lantern. She traced a route with her finger, her lips moving slightly as she murmured to herself. A group of soldiers walked by, their voices sharp and mocking. One of them, a wiry guy named Tanner with a fake friendly grin and eyes that didn't match, stopped and leaned over her table. "Hey, paper soldier," he said, dragging out the words, "You lost? The library's back in town?" His buddies laughed. Waiting for her to snap, Claire didn't. She folded her map with slow, careful movements, slid it into her bag, and looked at him just once, her blue eyes calm but piercing. "Library's closed," she said, soft but clear. Oft clear. Cut off. Guard and his friends nudged him to move on. As they walked away, one of them muttered, "She's weird, man. Let her play soldier." Claire unzipped her bag, pulled out a pencil, and started sharpening it. Her face blank like the whole thing never happened. During a late-night strategy session, Claire's quiet competence sparked a subtle shift. The team was hunched over a table, arguing about a nighttime ambush plan. Brody was pushing his idea as usual, but the map showed a blind spot nobody had noticed. Claire leaned forward, her voice barely audible. "If you move the rearguard here, you cover the ridge." The room went quiet, but not in a good way. Jensen, the civilian recruit, scoffed and tossed a crumpled paper at her. "Nice try, Professor, but we don't need your book smarts." The others laughed, but an older instructor, a quiet man named Vargas, with a limp, paused and glanced at the map. He didn't say anything, but he circled Claire's suggestion in red marker and slipped the map into his folder. The next day, the ambush drill went perfectly because the rearguard had been repositioned exactly as Claire suggested. Nobody mentioned her name, but Vargas gave her a slight nod as he passed, his eyes steady. Claire tucked her notebook away, her expression unchanged, but her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. The next morning, the team gathered in a dusty clearing for a mission planning session. Maps were pinned to a folding table, and the group was deep in debate over a flanking route through a narrow valley. Brody was leading the charge, his voice loud and cocky, like he'd already won the war. "We hit them from the west, fast and quiet. It's perfect." The others nodded, swept up in his energy. Claire stood at the edge, her arms crossed, listening. She stepped forward, her finger tapping the map once. "What if they've got unmanned aerial vehicle surveillance?" she asked, her voice so quiet it almost got lost. "That route becomes a kill zone." The group froze, then burst out laughing. Brody rolled his eyes. "Drones." "You watch too many movies, Evans," Kelsey chimed in. "Stick to your notes, paper soldier. Leave the real work to us." Claire didn't argue. She stepped back, her hands slipping into her pockets, her face unreadable. Her Riv, who'd been watching, didn't say a word. The plan went forward, but the next morning the drill was canceled. Word spread like wildfire. Real drone had flagged. The recon team, exactly where Claire predicted. Brody's face was red when he heard, but he didn't look at her. Nobody did. Claire sat on a crate outside the command tent, sharpening her pencil with a small knife, her movements slow and precise. Harav walked by, glanced at her, and muttered something under his breath. It wasn't an apology, but it was close. The other? Soldiers avoided her table at lunch, their laughter quieter now, their glances longer. The bullying escalated during a team-building exercise in the third week. The group was paired up for a trust fall drill meant to build camaraderie. Claire was last to go, and Malone, the big soldier with the barking laugh, was assigned to catch her. As she stepped onto the platform, he leaned toward his partner and said, "Loud enough for everyone to hear? Don't worry, she's light as a feather. Probably floats like paper too." The group erupted in laughter, and Malone made a show of stretching, his arms lazily, like he barely needed to try. Claire stood there, her back to him, her hands clenched at her sides. When she fell, Malone stepped aside at the last second, letting her hit the ground hard. The thud echoed, and the laughter stopped. Claire lay there for a moment, her breath hitching, then pushed herself up, her face pale but composed. She brushed the dirt off her uniform, her movements slow, and walked back to her spot without a word. Malone shrugged, grinning. "Told you. She'd bounce." Nobody met her eyes as she stood there, her silence cutting deeper than any scream. Hey, before we keep going, can you do Thread Tales a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to keep sharing stories like Claire's. Stories that hit you right in the heart and remind you what it means to keep going. Thanks for being here. Let's dive back in. The days got harder. A 5 kilometers run through rocky terrain left half the team doubled over, gasping for air. Claire crossed the finish line last, her face pale, her breath shallow and ragged. She bent over, hands on her knees, as Harav stood nearby with his clipboard, reading her scores aloud like he was delivering a verdict. Evans, grade C, endurance poor, reaction time slow. Conclusion, paper soldier. The words cut deep, and the group didn't hide their smirks. Malone couldn't resist. Careful, wind might blow her away. Laughter spread, some loud, some nervous. Claire straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. With a trembling hand, she walked to the water station, her steps slow, filled her canteen. Her fingers fumbled with the cap for a moment, just long enough for someone to notice. But she screwed it on and turned away, her face blank. During a field navigation exercise, Claire's foresight saved the team from disaster. The group was tasked with crossing a dense forest to reach a checkpoint by dusk, using only a compass and map. Brody, leading as usual, misread the coordinates, sending them toward a steep ravine. Claire, trailing at the back, noticed the error and spoke up, her voice steady but quiet. You're off by 2. That path drops into a gully. Brody spun around, his face twisted with irritation, but before he could snap, Carter, the instructor, checked the map and froze. She's right, he said, his voice tight. The team corrected course, reaching the checkpoint with minutes to spare. As they rested, Carter pulled Claire aside and handed her a worn compass from his own kit. Keep this, he said, his eyes steady. Claire nodded, slipping the compass into her pocket, her fingers brushing the leather cover. The others didn't mention it, but Jensen's usual smirk was gone when he passed her later. The cruelty peaked during a live-fire drill prep session. The team was cleaning rifles in a cramped shed, the air thick with oil and tension. Claire worked quietly, her movements precise, her rifle spotless. Tanner, still stinging from the wrist incident, decided to push harder. He grabbed her cleaning rag and tossed it into a bucket of dirty water, laughing as it sank. Gotta keep those hands soft for paperwork, right, Evans? The others joined in, their laughter sharp. Jensen picked up Claire's rifle and held it up like a trophy. Betches. Never even fired this thing outside a classroom. Claire reached for it, but he yanked it back, dangling it just out of reach. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as the group closed in, their voices overlapping with taunts. Claire stood still, her eyes locked on the rifle, her hands steady. At her sides, finally, she stepped forward, her voice low but firm. Put it down. Jensen hesitated, then dropped it on the table with a clatter, his grin faltering. Claire picked it up, checked it carefully, and resumed cleaning, her silence deafening. The firing range was where things shifted, the tactical exercise involved. Moving targets at 900 meters a challenge, even for seasoned shooters. Most of the trainees missed their shots, kicking up dirt or pinging off metal frames. Carter, the instructor, was losing patience, his voice sharp as he corrected their aim. Claire stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Permission to use the Barrett M82, sir. Carter raised an eyebrow. The Barrett was a beast 14 kilograms, a heavy sniper rifle that could knock you back if you weren't ready. A few soldiers snorted. She can't even lift it, Kelsey muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Carter nodded, more curious than convinced. Go ahead, Evans. Claire knelt, her small frame steady as she hefted the rifle. The range went quiet, the only sound the faint whistle of the wind. She adjusted her grip, her eyes narrowing as she tracked the targets. 5 shots, 5 direct hits. The targets didn't just fall, they shattered, pieces scattering across the dirt. Carter's jaw tightened, his clipboard forgotten in his hand. Major Reynolds, a tall man with graying hair and a habit of staying silent, pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the score sheet. The soldiers behind Claire didn't laugh this time. Tanner shifted his weight, his smirk gone. Claire set the rifle down, her hand steady, and stepped back. "Thank you, sir," she said to Carter, then walked away, her boots leaving faint prints in the dust. That night, the camp felt different. The soldiers sat around a fire, their voices lower, their jokes less sharp. Claire was off to the side, cleaning her boots with a rag, her movements slow and methodical. "Yeah?" A few guys, loosened up by the long day, started teasing her again. Tanner was at it as usual, his flashlight in hand. "If she's killed anyone, I'm a general," he said, grinning. "Let's see what her wrist says, chalk, or red ink." He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist before she could pull away. Claire's eyes went cold, and she yanked her arm back hard. The glove she always wore slipped just enough to show a glimpse of her skin. Tanner froze. So did everyone else. Major Reynolds was passing by, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped, his eyes catching the faint marks on Claire's wrist. 3 numbers carved like scars, 43,124. His face changed, like he'd seen something impossible. "Who authorized that marking?" asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Claire pulled her glove back on, her movements slow, deliberate. "I didn't want to forget," she said, her voice so soft it barely carried. Reynolds' eyes narrowed, the Shadow Brigade. "You're still alive?" The soldiers around the fire went silent. Tanner dropped the flashlight, his hands shaking. Claire didn't look at him. She picked up her boots, tucked the rag into her pocket, and walked away, the firelight catching the mud on her heels. During a mock interrogation drill, the group's hostility turned vicious. Claire was chosen as the prisoner, blindfolded and seated. In a metal chair, under a harsh spotlight, the team, led by Brody, was supposed to extract information through pressure tactics, but it quickly spiraled. Brody leaned in close, his voice mocking. "What's your secret, paper soldier? You bribe your way to the top?" Kelsey circled behind, yanking Claire's hair to tilt her head back. "Answer him, or we'll make this real fun." The others egged them on, their voices blending into a cruel chorus. Jensen tossed a cup of cold water in her face, laughing as she flinched, the droplets soaking her uniform. Claire's hands, bound behind her, twitched slightly, but she didn't speak. Her silence only fueled their taunts, each one sharper, more personal. Finally, Brody slammed his fist on the table. "You're nothing here, Evans. Nothing." Claire lifted, her chin, her blindfold damp, and said one word, "Enough." The room stilled, but the tension lingered like a bruise. A few days later, during a radio communication drill, Claire's expertise quietly turned the tide. The team was simulating a downed pilot rescue, but their signals were jammed, leaving them stranded. Brody's commands grew frantic, his voice cracking over the static. Claire, assigned to monitor the backup frequency, adjusted her headset and spoke softly into the mic, using a coded sequence nobody recognized. Within minutes, a clear signal broke through, pinpointing the pilot's location. The team completed the mission, but nobody acknowledged Claire's role except Ellison, the camp commander, who overheard her transmission. He approached her later, his face unreadable, and handed her a sealed envelope. "For your file," he said, his tone clipped but respectful. Claire opened it to find a commendation for exceptional technical skill, signed by a general she'd never met. She folded it carefully, her fingers lingering on the paper, and slipped it into her bag without a word. The next day, Harov called a meeting in the main tent. The combat showcase was coming up, a high-stakes event where trainees performed for top officers. Claire's name had been on the list, but not anymore. Harov read the decision aloud, his voice flat, like he was reading a weather report. Evans is cut from the demo team. Reason: poor discipline, unclear background, unsuitable conduct. A few soldiers smirked. Brody couldn't help himself. Who needs her on the field? She'd just mess up formation. Kelsey nodded, her ponytail bouncing as she whispered something to Malone. Claire stood at the edge of the group, her hands clasped behind her back, her face blank. She didn't argue, didn't flinch, just listened, her eyes fixed on a spot on the ground. The final bullying incident came during a public briefing, and it was unrelenting. The team was presenting their drill reports to a panel of officers, each soldier standing to summarize their role.
When Claire's turn came, she stepped forward.
Her notes neatly organized, her voice steady. But before she could finish her first sentence, Jensen interrupted, his voice loud and mocking. "Sorry. Can we get someone who's actually been in a fight?" The room laughed, and Kelsey jumped in. Her tone sugary but venomous. "Yeah, Evans. Why don't you stick to typing up our reports? You're so good at that." Even Harav smirked, letting the taunts roll on. Malone leaned back in his chair, calling, "Out. Bet she's got a gold star for penmanship back home." The officers didn't intervene, their silence emboldening the group. Claire paused, her notes trembling slightly in her hands, then continued speaking, her voice unwavering. When she finished, she sat down, her movements precise, but her knuckles were white as she gripped her chair. The room moved on, but the sting lingered. Then everything changed. A black military vehicle rolled into camp, its tires kicking up dust. Ellison, the camp commander, rushed out, his face tight. Colonel stepped out of the vehicle, his uniform crisp, his presence heavy. The soldiers straightened, their whispers dying. The colonel scanned the crowd, his eyes sharp. "Where's Claire Evans?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silence. Ellison pointed, and every eye turned to her. Claire stepped forward, her boots steady on the gravel. "We need her to lead NATO's sniper qualification drill," the colonel said. "She's the only one cleared for the role." Harav's face went pale. Brody looked away, his jaw tight. Claire slid her gloves back on, her eyes flicking over the group, not with anger. It's not with pride, just disinterest. During the colonel's visit, a quiet revelation shook the camp. As Claire prepared to leave, Ellison handed her a folder, his hands unsteady. Inside was a declassified report stamped with the Shadow Brigade's seal, detailing her role in a covert mission that saved an entire platoon. The document wasn't meant for public eyes, but Ellison had pulled strings to get it. It didn't say much, just, "You should have this." Claire scanned the pages, her fingers pausing on a grainy photo of her younger. Thinner, but with the same steady eyes, carrying a wounded soldier to safety. She closed the folder, her face unreadable, and handed it back. "Keep it safe," she said, her voice low. Ellison nodded, his usual sternness replaced by something softer. As she walked away, the soldiers nearby caught a glimpse of the folders. Cover, and the whispers stopped cold. They knew what the seal meant. The camp was never the same after that. Word spread fast, like fire through dry grass. Claire wasn't just some academy grad. She was Shadow Brigade, a name that carried weight. A unit most people thought was a myth. Tanner, the soldier who'd grabbed her wrist, was reassigned to logistics the next week. Nobody saw him again. Brody tried to laugh it off, but his jokes fell flat. A few days later, a post went viral on a military forum. His name, his comments. About Claire, all laid bare. He lost a sponsorship deal he'd been bragging about for weeks. Kelsey was dropped from her unit's next rotation. Nobody said it was because of Claire. Nobody had to. Claire didn't stay long. She was called to NATO's training headquarters, tasked with redesigning their sniper tactics program. Major Reynolds, the one who'd seen her wrist, started standing every time she entered a room. It wasn't just respect, it was something deeper, like he knew what those numbers meant. Claire never talked about them, never explained. But one day someone noticed a new mark on her wrist, carved with the same careful lines. 1. When they asked what it stood for, she paused, her eyes softening for the first time. "To forgive," she said, and turned away, her boots crunching. On the gravel, the camp went on without her, but it felt hollow. Soldiers who'd mocked her now told her story in hushed tones like it was a legend. Claire didn't care. She kept moving, her boots still caked with mud, her name tag still a little off-center. She didn't need their apologies, didn't need their awe. She'd carried those numbers on her wrist long before they knew her name. And she'd carry them long after they forgot it. Her husband arrived one day, unannounced. He was a quiet man, broad-shouldered, with eyes that didn't miss a thing. He didn't say much, just walked into the briefing room where Claire was packing her gear. The room went still. Harav, who'd called her unfit, froze mid-sentence. Brody looked at the floor, his hands clenched. Nobody needed to say his name. His presence said enough. Claire glanced at him, a small smile breaking her usual calm. She zipped her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out with him. The door closed behind them. The room stayed silent. The final twist came months later when Claire returned to the camp for a brief inspection. She wasn't there as a trainee, but as NATO's lead sniper instructor, her name now whispered with reverence. During a closed-door meeting, Harav, still stinging from his earlier judgments, tried to congratulate her, his voice awkward. Claire listened, her face neutral, then handed him a training manual she'd written. Every tactic in it was drawn from the camp's drills, flaws and all. "It's for your team," she said, her tone even. Harav flipped through it, his hands shaking as he recognized his own failed strategies, now corrected with surgical precision. The room of officers watched in silence, their respect for her cemented. Claire didn't linger. She left the manual and walked out, her boots steady, her legacy undeniable. Claire's life didn't stop there. She trained soldiers who'd go on to save lives. She wrote manuals that changed how snipers moved in the field, but she never forgot where she came from, never forgot the mud, the insults, the weight of that rifle in her hands. She carried it all, not as a burden, but as proof. She was more than a name tag, more than a nickname. Proof she'd survived. And those who'd laughed at her. They learned. Some lost jobs. Some lost respect. Some just lost the nerve to look her in the eye. It wasn't revenge. It was just the truth catching up slow and steady, like Claire's steps. Through the mud, she stood taller now, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. For every person who'd been called weak, who'd been pushed aside, who'd been told they didn't belong, she carried their weight too, and she never looked back. Her wrist told her story, carved in lines nobody could erase. 43 kills, 12 saved. For missions, 1 forgiveness. Numbers that held a life, a fight, a quiet victory. You weren't wrong to believe in her. You weren't alone in feeling that sting. She was there and she kept going. So can you? Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow. To walk with Thread Tales through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.